Nazi German troops previously invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941 and killed tens of millions of civilians and soldiers of that country. But, in April 1945, Nazi Germany, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, knelt. The fragile and disorganized line of defense had to withstand attacks by two Soviet army groups from the east and south. In all, some 1.5 million Soviet troops surrounded and overran the German capital. The attack was the last major onslaught of the war in Europe. All of that poured into a movie, which we will discuss in this video. But before we discuss the plot of this movie storyline, don't forget to subscribe, to give me encouragement. The movie begins with a very terrible battle between German and Soviet troops. Then it was seen, the Soviet troops were caught in a trap in a citizen's house. A high-ranking Unisoviet army, whose name is Steve, seen in a house of very friendly citizens. He decided to stay there until nightfall, and it was seen that Steve was very well received by the owner of the house. German troops began to realize that now, the Soviet troops were approaching. And sure enough, the Unisoviet troops led by Steve have started to enter to the city of Berlin. Hitler's troops were seen saying that the German troops were no longer able to hold back the movement of the Soviet troops. But Hitler still believed that his troops, many outside Berlin, would soon join. But apparently, the German troops had run out and were only left in the city of Berlin, whose condition was surrounded by un-Soviet troops. The scene shows the destruction of the city of Berlin as a result of the attack by the Soviet troops, which is getting fiercer. Soviet troops attacked the city of Berlin using heavy weapons, which damaged buildings and houses in the city of Berlin. Then, tanks belonging to the Soviet troops were seen attacking German posts and armory. The tank attacked easily without any resistance from the German troops. Steve, a high-ranking Unisoviet soldier, brought his troops to the underground station to penetrate Hitler's hideout. But apparently, the underground station has now been used as a shelter for civilians and made into an emergency hospital. But apart from that too, there were a lot of German troops hiding in that place. Instantly, the station became a battlefield, and there was close combat between German troops and the Soviets. In the end, the close combat was won by the Soviets. The scene moves to Hitler, who gets information that the Soviet troops have succeeded in defeating the German troops. Now, the underground station that is used to protect civilians has been controlled by the Soviet troops. Then Hitler, ordering his troops to fill the station with water. Hitler, who was stubborn, didn't care about his dead if the station was flooded with water. He also said, if there was a war, it was only natural if there were casualties. Then I saw Steve, who was asking the German soldiers about the location of Hitler's hideout. The German soldier, under threat of being killed if he doesn't give a hint, is where Hitler was hiding. In the end, the German soldiers, showing Hitler's hideout, were being searched by Steve. However, not long after, water began to flow into the station, which caused panic among the Soviet troops and the Germans. Now, the station has been filled with water, which turned the place into a very deadly place. All the people who were there crowded to seek higher ground. There, seen Steve, who ordered his troops to open the gate using a grenade. This was done because the main door to enter had been damaged due to the water coming very swiftly. Steve was asked by his troops to go up first, but apparently, Steve prioritized women and children. Even though outside the war is still going on, German and Soviet troops in the station, preferring to help civilians. German and Soviet troops working together to help and treat injured civilians. Then, Steve is seen trapped, having helped the harried civilians. He could only be silent and resigned because it was already impossible for Steve to save himself. Then you can see the fighting between the Soviet and German troops, which is getting worse. Now, Germany's destruction is in sight. German troops are already having a hard time to face the Soviet troops. Seen there, the high-ranking Soviet troops ordered one of his troops to raise the Soviet flag. This was done as proof that the Soviet Union had succeeded in defeating Germany. The scene switches to Hitler, who seems to be getting information that it is impossible for Germany to survive. Hitler, too, was asked to immediately run away from that place to avoid being chased by the Soviet troops. But it turned out it was too late. Soviet troops have located Hitler's location, and soon they will be arriving soon. On the other hand, the German troops had completely lost to the Soviet attack. But Hitler, he still believes Germany and he can still survive and will be victorious over this war. In addition, Hitler also refused to leave the place. But what was happening outside? The Soviet troops had arrived. It was no longer possible for Hitler to survive. Because there was no other choice, Hitler invited his girlfriend to die together. But apparently, Hitler's lover refused to die together. He also said that his status with Hitler was only a girlfriend. Because of this, Hitler's girlfriends refused to die together. Because he didn't want to die together, Hitler invited his girlfriend to marry him right then and there. Seen a priest who was taken by force by the rest of the German army. German soldiers who were carrying a priest for Hitler were suddenly shot by Unisoviet artillery. The priest, then brought by the Soviet troops to the loudspeaker. He was asked to stop the war, which was going on between the Germans and the Soviet Union, over the loudspeaker. The priest, seen trying to suppress the fighting troops of the Soviet Union and the rest of the German troops. And it turns out, Hitler still married his girlfriend, even though there was no priest there. Hitler's wedding, witnessed only by his military generals, was at the venue. The beauty of the city of Berlin, now only a memory. The city was badly damaged as a result of the attack by the Unisoviet forces, which were getting fiercer. Where you can see, the tall buildings in the city have been installed with the Soviet flag, which means they have won the war. The remaining German troops were out of ammunition, and there was no way for them to fight the Soviet troops. Scene then switches to Hitler, who looks desperate. He was seen saying goodbye with the German military officials who were there. Then, Hitler left them and went into his room. One of the generals who was there argued if Hitler must die by being shot, not by poison. The general then ordered his colleague to enter Hitler's room and shot him. In his room, Hitler forced his wife to drink poison, and in the end, the woman who had just been made his wife by Hitler died. After his wife died, Hitler then took a gun to end his life. But apparently, their Hitler was not brave enough to shoot himself. There then came the German officer, who immediately shot Hitler to death. German military officials then burned Hitler's body outside the venue. On the other hand, the Soviet troops had finished off the rest of the German troops. And now, Germany has been declared defeated. The next day, the German officials met the top officials of the Soviet troops, who had now taken control of Germany. Then he told the Unisoviet officials that Hitler was dead. The German officials asked the Unisoviet to stop launched an attack on Germany, which was now devastated. But apparently, the Soviets refused the request, because in the past, Germany also did the same thing to the USSR. What the Soviets wanted was only an unconditional surrender of Germany. But there, the Germans still did not want to hand over Germany to the Soviet Union. After a few days later, the Soviet Union received notification that the Germans had surrendered Germany unconditionally. At the end of this film, it shows the Unisoviet soldiers cheering for joy to celebrate their victory. And in the end, the film is finished.